The ledger wouldn't balance. 300 pounds missing, tenant families days from eviction, and the Duke's return carriage already rattling up the drive. Elara Vance pressed her ink-stained fingers against the numbers that could destroy her, or save dozens of lives she had no right to protect. Outside, gravel crunched. Boots hit stone. The door to Blackridge Hall slammed open with the force of a man who'd never learned to knock. She had perhaps 60 seconds before Adrian Thornfell walked into this room, and her invisible life shattered completely. If you want to see how far a woman with nothing can push a man with everything, stay with me. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your city. I want to know where this story reaches. Because what happens next? It's going to get messy. The morning Adrian Thornfell returned to Blackridge Hall, the entire household moved like a machine wound too tight. Elara noticed it first in the kitchen, cook's hands shaking as she arranged pheasant on silver, the way the scullery maid dropped a plate and burst into tears before anyone even raised their voice. Then in the hallways, where the footmen stood straighter, the maids averted their eyes, and even Mrs. Hewitt, the head housekeeper who ruled the staff with iron efficiency, kept checking the entrance hall clock as if willing it to slow down. He sent word he'd arrive by noon, Mrs. Hewitt said, her voice clipped. Everything must be perfect. The Duke does not tolerate disorder. Elara kept her head down, arms full of linens she didn't actually need to carry. That was the trick. Always look busy, always have a reason to be wherever you were. Never give anyone cause to ask why a woman with no title, no family connection, and no clear role was living in a house like this. She'd learned that survival skill young. The estate of Blackridge sprawled across 2,000 acres of Yorkshire moorland, dark, windswept, profitable, and entirely unforgiving. The hall itself stood like a fortress at its center, gray stone, mullioned windows, rooms that swallowed sound and warmth. Elara had lived here for 3 years. 3 years of managing things no one else wanted to manage, of making herself useful enough to keep but invisible enough to ignore. She wasn't a governess. There were no children. She wasn't a companion. The Dowager Duchess had died 2 winters ago. She wasn't quite a secretary, though she handled correspondence the aging estate steward, Mr. Pembroke, could no longer see well enough to manage. She was something in between, a fixture, a tool. It kept her fed. It kept her housed. It kept her alive. That was supposed to be enough. Miss Vance. She turned. Mrs. Hewitt stood at the corridor's end, hands folded, expression unreadable. The Duke will want the library accounts ready for review. See to it. Of course. Elara didn't ask why. You didn't ask why at Blackridge. You did, or you packed. The library occupied the hall's west wing, 3 stories of books most people never touched, leather chairs no one sat in, and a massive desk where the estate's financial records lived in organized chaos. Mr. Pembroke kept the ledgers technically, but his eyesight had been failing for months, and his memory wasn't far behind. So Elara had quietly taken over the actual work, recording rents, tracking expenditures, making sure the numbers closed at month's end. Except this month, they hadn't. She spread the ledgers across the desk, tracing the columns again. Tenant payments matched the rent roll. Supply costs looked normal. Wages accounted for. But £300 had simply vanished. Not a math error. Not a missed entry, just gone. With a note in Pembroke's shaky hand, transferred per instruction. Lord Castor. Lord Castor, the Duke's cousin. A man Elara had seen twice, both times from a distance, both times leaving her with the impression of someone who smiled too easily. She chewed her lip. Pembroke wouldn't question a family member. He probably hadn't even thought to. But £300, that could keep 6 families housed through winter, and if the Duke found the discrepancy and blamed Pembroke, or worse, blamed her. The front door boomed open. Voices flooded the entrance hall, deep, authoritative, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to fill a room. Where's Pembroke? He's resting, Your Grace. His health. Then who's been managing the accounts? A pause. Elara's stomach dropped. Miss Vance has been assisting, Your Grace. Assisting. The word landed like a stone. Footsteps. Coming this way. Elara barely had time to straighten, to smooth her skirt, before the library door swung open and Adrian Thornfell walked in. She'd seen portraits. The entire hall was full of them, Thornfells staring down from gilded frames, all sharp noses and cold eyes. But portraits didn't prepare you for the real thing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, younger than she expected, maybe 30, but with the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. Dark hair, darker eyes, and an expression that suggested he'd already evaluated everything in the room, including her, and found it barely acceptable. He didn't greet her, didn't introduce himself, just walked straight to the desk, lifted the top ledger, and flipped it open. Elara stood frozen. "You've been managing these?" Not a question. "Mr. Pembroke's vision has declined, Your Grace. I've been helping with his supervision." His supervision? Adrian's eyes didn't leave the page. "And you are?" "Elara Vance." "That tells me nothing." Her throat tightened. "I assist with correspondence and record keeping. I've been at Blackridge for 3 years. "Under what arrangement?" "The Dowager Duchess took me in after my father passed. I had some education. She thought I could be useful." "Useful?" He turned a page, then another. His jaw tightened. He'd seen it. The gap. The missing 300 pounds. "This transfer," he said quietly. "Explain it." "I can't, Your Grace. The note says it was per Lord Castor's instruction. I don't have authority to question." "Did you verify it?" "No." "Did you ask Pembroke?" "He's been unwell." "That's not an answer." Elara's hands clenched behind her back. "No, I didn't ask." Adrian set the ledger down with deliberate care. When he looked at her, his eyes were flat. "Then you allowed 300 pounds to leave this estate's accounts without documentation, verification, or oversight." "I didn't allow anything. I record what I'm told to record." "And if you're told to record theft," the air went cold. "Your Grace, I don't—" "Do you understand what 300 pounds means to the families on this land?" "Yes." The word came out harder than she meant. "I do." Something flickered in his expression. Not softening, just recalculation. "Then you'll help me find out where it went." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. An order, not an invitation. Elara stared at the empty doorway, heart pounding. She'd survived 3 years by being invisible. Adrian Thornfell had just made that impossible. The Duke spent the next 2 days tearing through the estate like a winter wind. He inspected every tenant cottage, reviewed every contract, questioned every account. Elara was dragged along, not as an equal, but as a resource. Someone who knew where things were, what the record said, who'd paid, and who hadn't. She quickly learned that Adrian Thornfell did not do anything halfway. He walked the fields in boots caked with mud, ignoring the rain. He sat in tenant kitchens, asking direct questions about rent, repairs, fairness. He pulled the estate steward, the land agent, and even the groundskeeper into meetings that lasted hours, and he noticed everything. "This cottage was supposed to be re-roofed last spring," he said, standing in the doorway of a sagging structure where a family of 5 somehow survived. Rain dripped through rotted thatch. "Why wasn't it?" The land agent, a weasel-faced man named Grayson, shifted. "Funds were redirected, Your Grace. Priorities? To what?" "The stables required." "The stables are for horses. This is for people." Adrian's voice stayed level, but the air around him felt dangerous. "Fix it. This week." Grayson's mouth thinned. "Of course, Your Grace." But Elara saw the look he shot her when Adrian turned away. A look that said, "This is your fault." Maybe it was. That night, Adrian summoned her to the study. It was smaller than the library, more personal. A fire burned low in the grate. Maps covered one wall, estate boundaries, tenant plots, roads, and rivers. Adrian stood in front of them, still in his mud-streaked boots, a glass of whiskey in one hand. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door." She did. "The missing 300 pounds, he said. "It's not the first time." Elara's breath caught. "I went back 6 months," Adrian continued. "Small transfers, 10 pounds here, 20 there, all noted as per instruction, all tied to Castor or the land agent. Alone, they're easy to miss. Together?" He finally looked at her. "It's systematic." "Theft?" "Yes." "Why would they—" "Money, power, because they thought I wouldn't notice." His expression hardened. "Because my father didn't." There was something bitter in the way he said it. something old. Elara stepped closer to the desk, where ledgers lay open, marked with Adrian's notes. What do you want me to do? Keep tracking it, every transaction. I need to know the scope before I move. And if Grayson or Lord Castor realize what we're doing? They won't. You're invisible, remember? His mouth almost curved. Use it. It wasn't cruelty. It was strategy. And despite everything, Elara felt something shift. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. He saw what she was, and he was willing to use it. I'll need access to older records, she said, before I arrived. Take whatever you need. And if I find something worse? Adrian's eyes locked on hers. Then we burn it down. Yeah. 3 weeks later, Elara found something worse. It was buried deep, 5 years back, in a leather-bound ledger that smelled like mildew and neglect. A land transfer. Tenant plots along the eastern boundary, signed over to a holding company she'd never heard of. The paperwork looked legitimate. Official seals. Signatures. But the families who'd lived there? Gone. Evicted for non-payment, even though their rent records showed they'd paid in full. She cross-referenced the holding company. It traced back to a shell entity. And that entity? Owned by a consortium that included Lord Castor and 2 other names she recognized. Members of the gentry. Wealthy. Connected. Untouchable. They'd stolen land from tenant families and sold it for profit, and Adrian's father had either approved it or never noticed. Elara sat back, the ledger open in front of her, and felt the weight of it settle in her chest. This wasn't just theft. This was betrayal. Institutional. Generational. She should have walked away. Should have closed the book, left it on the desk, and gone back to being invisible. Instead, she gathered every piece of evidence she could find and went looking for the Duke. She found him in the stables. He was alone, brushing down a black stallion with methodical precision. No groomsmen, no attendants, just Adrian and the horse, in the kind of quiet that felt deliberate. Your Grace? He glanced up, saw her expression, and set the brush aside. What is it? Elara held out the ledger. You should see this. He took it, read the pages she'd marked. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the leather. How many families? 12, maybe more. The records are incomplete. And the buyers? Lord Castor, Sir Redmond, Lord Valen. Adrian's jaw worked. My father's closest allies. Yes. And the current tenant situations? Most were relocated to smaller plots, worse land, higher rents. Elara's voice stayed steady, even though her pulse was hammering. Some just disappeared from the records entirely. Adrian closed the ledger, set it on a bench, looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. You could have buried this. I could have? Why didn't you? Because those families had faces now, names, children who deserved better than this. Because staying silent felt worse than speaking up, even if it destroyed her. But she didn't say that. Because you told me to track it, she said instead. And this is where it led. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up the ledger again. I'll need witnesses, documentation, proof that will hold up in front of the entire county if necessary. You're going to challenge them? I'm going to end them. The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified her. Your Grace, these men are powerful. They have alliances, influence. If you move against them, they stole from people under my family's protection. His voice went cold. I don't care how powerful they are. And your engagement? That stopped him. Elara hadn't meant to say it, but everyone knew. Adrian Thornfell was promised to Lady Marguerite Castor, Lord Castor's daughter. A strategic match. An alliance that would secure Blackridge's political future for a generation. If Adrian exposed Castor, that alliance shattered. You think I should ignore this? He said quietly. For a marriage contract? I think you should understand what you're risking. I understand perfectly. Adrian stepped closer. Too close. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the sharp focus in his eyes. What I don't understand is why you care. I don't. The lie came easily. I just don't want to be collateral damage when this explodes. His mouth tightened. Then stay out of it. You brought me into it. And now I'm telling you to leave it alone." He picked up the brush again, turned back to the horse. "Dismissal. I'll handle this." Elara stood there, ledger in hand, fury building. She'd risked everything to bring him the truth, and he was shutting her out like she was a servant who'd overstepped. Maybe that's all she was. She left the stables, the ledger still clutched in her hands, and went back to the library. But she didn't stop digging. Because if Adrian Thornfell thought he could fight this battle alone, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The assembly was called for the end of the month. It was tradition, an annual gathering where the Duke met with landowners, gentry, and tenant representatives to discuss the estate's business. Polite, formal, performative. This year, Adrian intended to turn it into a reckoning. Elara saw the preparations, watched as he compiled evidence, drafted accusations, built a case that would destroy half the county's elite if he presented it. She also watched him grow colder, more isolated. The few allies he'd had began distancing themselves. Word spread that the Duke was erratic, overreacting, dishonoring his father's legacy. Lady Marguerite visited once. Elara saw her from a window, elegant, poised, perfectly controlled. The kind of woman who belonged in a house like this. The kind of woman Adrian was supposed to marry. They spoke in the garden. Elara couldn't hear the words, but she saw Marguerite's expression shift from confusion to anger, to something that looked like pity. When she left, Adrian stood alone in the garden for a long time. That night, Elara found him in the library, surrounded by papers, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the desk. "You shouldn't be here," he said, without looking up. "Neither should you." He almost smiled. Almost. "I'm not going to stop," he said, "even if it costs me everything." "I know." "Then why are you still here?" Elara didn't have a good answer, not one she wanted to say out loud. "Because someone has to make sure you don't burn the whole estate down in the process." This time, he did smile. Faint, tired, real. "Fair enough." She sat down across from him, picked up one of the documents, and started reading. They worked in silence until dawn, and when the assembly came, Elara knew, whatever happened next, there was no going back. Not for him, not for her, not for any of them. The morning of the assembly, Elara woke to find a letter slipped under her door. No signature, no seal, just 3 words in precise, slanted handwriting. "Don't attend today." She crushed it in her fist and threw it in the fireplace. Someone was nervous. Good. The great hall had been transformed. Long tables arranged in a U-shape, chairs for 30 of the county's most powerful men, and they were all men, except for Lady Marguerite, who sat beside her father like a porcelain ornament meant to be admired but not heard. Elara recognized most of the faces from her research. Lord Castor, of course, with his practiced smile and expensive coat. Sir Redmond, bloated and red-faced, already reaching for wine, though it wasn't yet noon. Lord Valen, thin as a blade, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. And at the head table, Adrian. He looked like he hadn't slept, but he sat with the kind of rigid control that made him seem carved from the same stone as the hall itself. The ledgers were stacked beside him, evidence arranged in neat piles, a powder keg waiting for a match. Elara had been told to stay in the back, behind the screens where servants observed but didn't participate. Invisible, as always. She hated it, but she understood it. If Adrian was going to detonate his family's world, he needed to do it without appearing influenced by someone like her. A woman with no standing, no name, no right to be in that room at all. So she watched from the shadows as the assembly began. The first hour was predictable. Reports on crop yields, discussion of infrastructure repairs, polite disagreements about timber rights, the kind of business that kept estates running and powerful men feeling important. Then Adrian stood. The room went quiet. "There's one more matter," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "It concerns financial irregularities I've discovered in the estate accounts." Lord Castor's smile didn't waver. "Irregularities, Your Grace. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Adrian picked up the first ledger. 6 months ago, £300 were transferred from the estate's operational funds, with a note claiming authorization from Lord Castor. No documentation, no oversight. The funds never returned. A clerical error, surely. It wasn't an error. Adrian's eyes locked on Castor. It was theft, and it wasn't isolated. He laid out the evidence methodically. Transaction by transaction. Name by name. The room listened in stunned silence as Adrian dismantled 5 years of carefully hidden corruption. Stolen rents. Fraudulent land transfers. Tenant families evicted so their plots could be sold for profit to holding companies owned by the very men sitting at this table. Sir Redmond's face went from red to purple. Lord Valen sat perfectly still, fingers steepled, calculating. And Lord Castor? He leaned back in his chair, expression shifting from surprise to something colder, more dangerous. These are remarkable claims, Your Grace, Castor said quietly. Do you have proof? Adrian slid a stack of documents across the table. Contracts, transfer records, signed correspondence. Some bearing your signature, some bearing my father's. Marguerite's hand went to her throat. Your father was a great man, Castor said, voice hardening. Are you truly prepared to drag his name through the mud based on… what? The word of a hired clerk with an agenda? Every eye in the room turned to the shadows where Elara stood. Her stomach dropped. Miss Vance discovered the discrepancies, Adrian said evenly, but I verified every piece of evidence myself. This has nothing to do with her and everything to do with you. A woman with no family, no prospects, living off your charity? Castor's smile turned vicious. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I wonder what kind of influence she might have over a young duke who's been isolated in this estate for weeks. Women like that can be very persuasive. The insinuation hung in the air like poison. Adrian's jaw clenched. You will not… I'm simply asking the questions everyone here is thinking. Castor gestured around the room. We all mourn your father. We understand grief can cloud judgment, but to accuse respected members of this community based on paperwork assembled by a woman with dubious motives, that's not justice. That's recklessness. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Elara felt the room closing in. They weren't going to believe Adrian, or they didn't want to, because believing him meant admitting their own complicity, their own willingness to look away while families suffered. She saw Adrian's hands flatten on the table, saw the tension in his shoulders. He was losing them, and it was her fault. Because Castor was right about one thing. She had no credibility here, no voice, no power. She was the weak point in Adrian's case, and Castor had just driven a knife straight through it. If I may, Your Grace. The voice came from the far end of the table. An older man, silver-haired, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades working land, not just owning it. Elara recognized him, Thomas Greer, one of the tenant representatives. Adrian nodded. Greer stood slowly. I farmed Blackridge land for 40 years. My father before me, his father before him. And I remember when the eastern plots were taken. He looked directly at Castor. Families I'd known my whole life, gone in a season. We were told it was legal, proper, but it never sat right. This is hardly… I'm not finished. Greer's voice, though quiet, cut through Castor's interruption like steel. You want to talk about Miss Vance's motives? Fine. Let's talk about yours. Those families you evicted? Where'd that land go? Who profited? Castor's expression went flat. I don't have to answer to… You do if the Duke asks. Greer turned to Adrian. Your Grace, I'll swear to what I saw. So will a dozen other men who were there. If you need witnesses, you've got them. Another voice joined in, then another. Tenant farmers, small landholders. Men who'd been silent for years suddenly finding their courage because one of their own had spoken first. The tide was shifting. Castor saw it too. His smile vanished completely. This is absurd. You're going to take the word of… I'm going to investigate every claim, Adrian said, his voice cutting through the noise. Thoroughly, publicly, and if the evidence supports prosecution, I will see charges brought against anyone involved, regardless of their title or their relationship to this estate. Including your father? The room went silent again. Adrian's face could have been stone. My father is dead. He can't answer for his actions. But I can. And I will not allow his legacy, or mine, to be built on theft and exploitation. Marguerite stood abruptly. Adrian, you can't possibly… Lady Marguerite. His tone was formal, distant. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me? Her voice cracked. You're destroying everything. Your reputation, your alliances, our future. There is no our future. The words fell like an executioner's blade. Marguerite stared at him, face draining of color. What? I'm ending our engagement. Castor shot to his feet. You don't have that authority. I have every authority. The contract was contingent on mutual consent and good faith. Your family has demonstrated neither. Adrian's gaze didn't waver from Marguerite. I'm sorry. You deserve better than this, but I can't marry into a family built on corruption. Marguerite's hand trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. For a moment, Elara thought she might cry, or scream, or throw something. Instead, she straightened, lifted her chin, and walked out of the hall with the kind of dignity that came from years of training in how to survive humiliation in public. Castor watched her go, then turned back to Adrian with an expression that could have curdled milk. You've made a grave mistake, Your Grace. I've made the only choice I could live with. Then I hope you can live with the consequences. Castor gathered his papers, motioned to his allies, and walked out. Half the room followed him. The assembly dissolved into chaos. Elara stood frozen in the shadows, heart hammering, watching Adrian remain at the head table like a captain on a sinking ship, refusing to abandon his post even as everything around him fell apart. He'd done it. He'd actually done it, and it had cost him everything. But the estate felt different in the days that followed. Quieter, heavier. Like the air before a storm that hasn't quite broken yet. Adrian threw himself into the investigation with the single-minded focus of a man who'd burned his bridges and had nothing left to lose. He brought in magistrates from neighboring counties, men with no ties to the families involved. He interviewed tenants, reviewed decades of records, built a case so airtight that even Castor's expensive solicitors couldn't dismantle it. But the cost was immediate and brutal. Invitations dried up. Former allies stopped responding to correspondence. The county's social circles, which had once treated the Duke of Blackridge as untouchable, now treated him like a disease. Elara heard the whispers from the staff, saw the way visiting tradesmen looked at Adrian with a mixture of pity and contempt. The man who'd thrown away a brilliant match and powerful alliances to defend tenant farmers and chase shadows in old ledgers. He was becoming a pariah in his own class, and it was getting worse. One afternoon, Elara found him in the study, staring at a letter with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, something closer to exhaustion. What is it? He handed her the letter without a word. It was from the bishop. A formal, polite message expressing concern over the Duke's recent actions and suggesting that perhaps a period of reflection and spiritual guidance might be beneficial. Translation: the church was distancing itself too. They think you're losing your mind, Elara said quietly. Maybe I am. You're not. How do you know? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the rawness in his expression was almost painful to witness. What if they're right? What if I've destroyed everything my family built for nothing? It's not for nothing. Those families will still be poor, still be powerless, still be at the mercy of whoever owns this land after me. He turned away, hands bracing against the desk. I thought doing the right thing would matter, but all I've done is make myself irrelevant. Elara felt something crack open in her chest. She'd seen Adrian as untouchable, unshakable, a force of nature in expensive boots. Seeing him like this, broken, doubting, human, it hurt in a way she hadn't expected. You gave them their voices back, she said. You made it possible for people like Thomas Greer to stand up and speak. That matters. Does it? Yes. He was silent for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You didn't drag me. I walked in on my own. Why? The question came out hoarse. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Why did you help me? Because she'd spent her entire life being invisible, and it had made her safe but also hollow. Because watching him fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves had reminded her what it felt like to care about something bigger than survival. Because somewhere in the past month, she'd stopped seeing him as the Duke and started seeing him as Adrian, flawed, stubborn, capable of both cruelty and extraordinary courage. But she didn't say any of that, because it was the right thing to do, she said instead. Adrian laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. The right thing. That's what's going to be carved on my tombstone. He did the right thing and died alone. You're not going to die alone, aren't I? He gestured at the letter. I've alienated everyone who mattered. No allies, no marriage prospects, no political future. Just me and a estate full of people who think I've lost my mind. You have me. The words came out before she could stop them. Adrian went very still. Elara's face burned. I mean, as someone who works here, who understands what you're trying to do. I didn't mean, I know what you meant. His voice had gone quiet. Careful. And you shouldn't offer that. Why not? Because I'm poison right now. Anyone associated with me becomes a target. He met her eyes. You should leave, Elara, before this gets worse. I'm not leaving. You should. Well, I'm not. She crossed her arms, chin lifting in defiance. So you're stuck with me. Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, but close. Stubborn. Says the man who just torched his entire social standing rather than compromise. That's different. How? Because I had a choice. You don't. If you stay, they'll destroy you too. Let them try. This time he did smile, small, exhausted, real. You're infuriating. Good. The moment stretched between them, fragile and dangerous, full of things neither of them could afford to say out loud. Then the door burst open and Mrs. Hewitt rushed in, face pale. Your Grace, there are men at the gate, from Lord Castor. They're demanding entry. Adrian's expression shuddered immediately. How many? 6. Maybe more. They're armed. Elara's blood went cold. Armed? Why would they? Because legal channels are too slow. Adrian was already moving, grabbing his coat. They're going to try to intimidate me into dropping the investigation. That's insane. That's power. He turned to Mrs. Hewitt. Lock the doors. Send word to the magistrate, and keep everyone inside. Adrian, Elara grabbed his arm. You can't go out there alone. I'm not letting armed thugs onto my land. Then take someone with you. Grayson. Or Grayson's probably the one who told them when to come. Adrian's jaw set. I'm handling this. He walked out before she could argue further. Elara stood there for half a second, terror and fury warring in her chest. Then she followed him. The confrontation happened in the courtyard. 6 men on horseback, dressed like gamesmen but carrying themselves like soldiers. The kind of men you hired when you wanted a message, delivered with the threat of violence. Adrian stood in front of the hall's main entrance, alone, hands loose at his sides. Elara stayed in the doorway, close enough to see, far enough to hopefully avoid getting dragged into whatever was about to happen. The lead rider, a scarred, grim-faced man with the build of someone who'd spent his life hurting people, dismounted slowly. Your Grace, the title came out mocking. Lord Castor sends his regards. I'm sure he does. He'd like you to reconsider this investigation before it causes unnecessary trouble. The only trouble here is the crime your employer committed. The man's smile was unpleasant. Funny thing about crime, sometimes the evidence disappears, sometimes witnesses change their minds, sometimes buildings catch fire. Adrian's expression didn't change. Are you threatening me? I'm offering friendly advice. Then here's mine. Get off my land. Now. The man took a step closer. Or what? You'll fight all 6 of us. You'll drag this to court and watch your reputation burn? You've already lost, boy. You just don't know it yet. I know exactly what I've lost. Adrian's voice went quiet, deadly. The question is whether you know what you're about to lose if you don't turn around and leave. For a moment, Elara thought the man might actually attack him. Then a voice called from the gate. Need help, Your Grace? Thomas Greer stood there, flanked by a dozen tenant farmers carrying tools, scythes, hammers, pitchforks. Not an army, but enough. The scarred man's eyes narrowed. More figures appeared behind Greer, more tenants, more farmers. Blackridge workers who'd spent their lives being told to keep quiet, suddenly standing together in the courtyard like a wall of weathered stone and quiet fury. We heard there might be trouble, Greer said calmly. Thought we'd make sure His Grace knows he's not alone. The scarred man looked at Adrian, then at the crowd, calculating odds. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Adrian said. It is. The men remounted and rode off. The courtyard stayed silent until they disappeared down the road. Then someone laughed, a nervous, relieved sound, and the tension broke. The farmers began dispersing, murmuring among themselves, shooting glances at Adrian that ranged from respect to something like awe. Greer approached, gripping his cap. Your Grace, we wanted you to know we stand with you. Adrian's throat worked. Thank you. We've been waiting a long time for someone to give a damn. Turns out it matters who's in charge. Greer nodded once, turned, and walked away. Adrian stood there alone again, looking like he'd been struck. Elara stepped out of the doorway. You're not alone, she said quietly. He turned to face her, and the expression on his face was so raw, so unguarded, that it almost hurt to look at. I know, he said, and for the first time since this entire nightmare started, Elara saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or determination or exhaustion. It was hope. That night, Adrian summoned her to the library. Not for work, not for planning, just to talk. They sat by the fire, the room dark except for the flames, the estate silent around them. Adrian had poured 2 glasses of whiskey. Elara took hers, even though she rarely drank. I didn't think they'd come, he admitted. The tenants. I thought they'd stay out of it. They're tired of being silent. Because of you. Elara shook her head. Because of you. You gave them a reason to believe things could change. And if I fail, then at least you tried. Adrian stared into the fire. My father would have hated this. Everything I've done. Maybe. Or maybe he would have been proud. You didn't know him. No, but I know you. She hesitated. And I think maybe he taught you to care about this land, even if he didn't know how to show it himself. Adrian was quiet for a long time. I ended my engagement today, he said finally, in front of everyone. And I didn't feel anything. No regret, no doubt. Just relief. He looked at her. Does that make me a monster? It makes you honest. Marguerite didn't deserve that. No. But she didn't deserve a marriage built on lies either. He took a drink. I don't know how to do this, Elara. How to be the kind of duke this estate needs. How to rebuild what I've broken. You don't have to know. You just have to keep going. With what? No allies? No support? Just people who believe in what you're doing. That's more than most leaders ever get. Adrian looked at her then, really looked at her, and Elara felt something shift in the air between them. Something that had been building for weeks, unspoken, undeniable. Why are you still here? He asked softly. I told you. No, the real reason. Her heart hammered. This was dangerous. This was the kind of honesty that could destroy everything. But she was so tired of lying, of hiding, of being invisible. Because when I'm with you, she said quietly, I don't feel invisible anymore. Adrian's breath caught. The fire crackled between them, and then he leaned forward, and she knew that whatever happened next would change everything. His hand came up to her face, thumb brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contrasted everything harsh about the world they lived in. Elara! The door slammed open. They jerked apart. Grayson stood in the doorway, face twisted with something ugly. Triumph, maybe, or malice. Your Grace, Lord Castor is filing formal charges against you for defamation and breach of contract. His smile was vicious. The magistrate will be here tomorrow to take your statement, and they're demanding Miss Vance be questioned as well. The bottom dropped out of Elara's world. Adrian stood slowly, carefully, like a man handling explosives. On what grounds? Conspiracy. Fraud. Manipulation of estate records. Grayson's eyes slid to Elara. They're saying she fabricated evidence to discredit Lord Castor and secure her position here through undue influence over your Grace. Elara couldn't breathe. They were going to destroy her, pin everything on her, make her the villain so Castor could walk away clean. Adrian's voice, when it came, was ice. Get out. Your Grace, get out. Grayson left, still smiling. The door closed. Elara stood on shaking legs. Adrian, I know. He crossed to her, hands gripping her shoulders. I know. This is Castor's move. He can't fight the evidence, so he's attacking you instead. They're going to arrest me. No, they're not. You can't stop them. Yes, I can. His eyes blazed. I'm not letting them touch you. How? You have no power here anymore, no allies, no... Then I'll find some. His hands tightened. Elara, listen to me. You are not going to pay for my choices. I won't allow it. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. He was already moving, grabbing paper, writing furiously. Letters, summons, calling in every remaining favor, every forgotten connection, every shred of influence he still possessed. Elara watched him work, terror and something else, something fierce and bright, burning in her chest. He was going to war. For her. And when the magistrate arrived tomorrow, one way or another, everything would finally break wide open. The magistrate arrived at dawn with an escort of 6 constables and a smugness that made Elara want to break something. His name was Pemberton, a thin, officious man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose and a voice like fingernails on slate. He'd brought formal writs, stamped and sealed, charging Elara Vance with conspiracy to defraud, falsification of records, and criminal manipulation of a peer of the realm. Adrian met him in the entrance hall, still in yesterday's clothes, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. This is absurd, he said flatly, blocking the staircase that led to the upper floors where Elara had been ordered to stay. Miss Vance has committed no crime. That will be determined through proper investigation, Your Grace. Pemberton sniffed, adjusting his spectacles. Lord Castor has provided substantial testimony suggesting Miss Vance fabricated evidence to damage his reputation and secure her position in your household through improper means. Improper means. The nature of your relationship with Miss Vance has been called into question. Adrian's jaw could have shattered stone. My relationship with Miss Vance is none of your concern. It is when it involves potential criminal conspiracy. Pemberton gestured to the constables. We're authorized to take her into custody for questioning. You can cooperate or we can proceed by force. You're not touching her. Your Grace, I understand you're protective of your staff, but she's not staff. The words came out hard, definitive. She's under my protection, and I will not allow you to arrest her based on lies told by a man trying to cover his own theft. Pemberton's expression soured. Lord Castor is a respected member of... Lord Castor is a thief. I have documentation proving he and his associates stole land and money from tenant families under my father's watch. That's the crime you should be investigating. We've reviewed your accusations. They're inconclusive. Inconclusive? Adrian's voice dropped to something dangerous. I have signed contracts, transfer records, witness testimony from a dozen families, testimony from tenants who are beholden to you for their livelihoods, hardly impartial. Pemberton pulled out another document. Furthermore, Lord Castor has questioned the authenticity of several documents you've presented, suggesting they may have been altered or fabricated by someone with access to your records. Someone like Miss Vance. Elara heard this from the top of the stairs, where she'd been standing since the commotion began. Her hands gripped the banister so hard her knuckles went white. They were going to twist everything, make her the architect of a conspiracy instead of the person who'd simply found the truth. And Adrian. Adrian couldn't stop them. Not with words, not with threats, not with anything except the power he'd already burned through trying to do the right thing. She started down the stairs. Elara, don't... Adrian turned, seeing her. It's fine. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I'll go with them. Answer their questions. Clear this up. No. Adrian, they have a warrant. I don't care. He moved to block her path. You're not going anywhere with them. You can't stop them. Watch me. Pemberton sighed like a tutor dealing with a difficult child. Your Grace, this is becoming obstruction of justice. I'd hate to add charges against you as well. Then add them. Adrian's eyes never left Elara's face. But you're not taking her. The constables shifted, hands moving toward truncheons. This was going to get ugly. Elara put a hand on Adrian's arm, felt the tension coiled there like a spring wound too tight. Let me go, she said quietly. I haven't done anything wrong. The truth will come out. The truth doesn't matter to them. Then I'll make it matter. Elara sub... Trust me, something cracked in his expression. Not surrender. Something worse. The realization that he couldn't protect her from this. That for all his power, his title, his absolute authority over thousands of acres of land, he couldn't stop 6 men with a piece of paper from taking away the one person who'd stood beside him when everyone else walked away. "I'll be right behind you," he said hoarsely. "I swear it." "I know." She stepped past him, chin up, hands steady, despite the terror clawing at her throat. Pemberton looked almost disappointed that it hadn't come to violence. "Miss Vance, you'll accompany us to the magistrate's office for questioning. You have the right to—" "I know my rights." She met his eyes. "Let's get this over with." They led her out into the gray morning, into a closed carriage that smelled like old leather and fear. The door shut with a finality that made her stomach twist. Through the window, she saw Adrian standing in the doorway of Blackridge Hall, looking like a man watching his world collapse in real time. Then the carriage lurched forward, and he disappeared from view. The magistrate's office was a cramped, cheerless room in the county seat, 20 miles from Blackridge. They kept Elara waiting for 2 hours in a bare anteroom with a single chair and a constable who watched her like she might sprout wings and fly away. When they finally brought her into the interrogation room, Lord Castor was already there. He sat behind a long table beside Pemberton, looking every inch the wounded aristocrat. Marguerite sat beside him, pale and perfect, eyes downcast. A performance of family solidarity. Elara sat across from them, alone. "Miss Vance!" Pemberton settled into his chair, arranging papers with fussy precision. "Let's begin. How long have you been employed at Blackridge Hall? 3 years? And your role there?" "I assist with correspondence and record-keeping." "Under whose direction?" "Initially the Dowager Duchess. After her death, the estate steward, Mr. Pembroke. Recently, the Duke himself." Pemberton made a note. "And during this time you had access to sensitive financial records?" "Yes." "Unsupervised access?" Elara hesitated. "Mr. Pembroke's eyesight has been failing. I worked independently when necessary." "So you admit you had the means and opportunity to alter documents without oversight?" "I didn't alter anything. We'll return to that." Pemberton glanced at Castor, who gave a slight nod. "Let's discuss your relationship with the Duke. How would you characterize it?" "Professional?" "Professional." Castor leaned forward, expression all false concern. "Miss Vance, we're all adults here. A young woman, alone and unprotected, living in close proximity to an unmarried duke. Surely there were complications." "There were no complications." "Then why did the Duke risk everything, his reputation, his engagement, his family's legacy, to defend you?" Castor's voice turned sharp. "What hold do you have over him?" "I don't have any hold over—" "You convinced him to betray his own class, to turn against his father's closest allies, to destroy alliances built over generations." Castor's hand slammed the table. "And you expect us to believe you did this through simple record-keeping?" Elara's temper, so carefully controlled, finally snapped. "I convinced him to do the right thing. That's my crime. I showed him evidence that you and your associates stole from families who had nothing, and he chose to act on it instead of looking away like his father did." She leaned forward, matching Castor's intensity. "If that makes me guilty of something, then charge me. But stop pretending this is about altered records or improper influence. You're terrified because someone finally called you out for what you are." Castor's face went red. "How dare you!" "My lord," Marguerite's voice, quiet and controlled, cut through the anger. "Perhaps we should focus on the facts." Castor shot her a look, but subsided. Pemberton cleared his throat. "Miss Vance, did you or did you not bring allegations against Lord Castor to the Duke's attention?" "I brought discrepancies in the accounts to his attention. He investigated and drew his own conclusions. Convenient that these discrepancies pointed directly at his fiancée's father. The evidence pointed where it pointed. I didn't create it. Can you prove that?" "Can you prove I did?" Pemberton's mouth thinned. "We have testimony suggesting you had motive to damage Lord Castor's relationship with the Duke, that you sought to ingratiate yourself by manufacturing a crisis only you could help solve." "Testimony from whom?" "Estate staff. People who observed your behavior. Grayson." "Of course. Probably half the servants who'd resented her from the start, who'd seen an outsider and decided she needed to be put in her place. Ask them if I ever altered a single record, Elara said evenly. Ask them if I ever had access to the documents without witnesses present. Ask them anything except vague insinuations about my behavior, and you'll find nothing. Because she'd been careful. Obsessively, painfully careful. Every piece of evidence verified, cross-referenced, documented. She'd known this might come. Known that someone like her, powerless, expendable, would be the first target when the powerful felt threatened. She just hadn't expected them to be this brazen about it. Pemberton shuffled papers, looking increasingly frustrated. Nevertheless, the seriousness of these allegations requires thorough investigation. You'll be held pending further questioning. Held for how long? Until we're satisfied with your answers. You mean until you've decided whether to prosecute me for crimes I didn't commit? Mind your tone, Miss Vance. Or what? You'll add disrespect to the list? Elara stood, anger finally overriding fear. You want to hold me? Fine, but put it in writing, make it official, because when this goes to trial, and it will, I want every piece of this farce documented. Pemberton looked at Castor uncertainly, and in that moment, Elara saw the truth. They didn't have a case. They had accusations, innuendo, and the weight of class prejudice, but no actual evidence. This whole performance was meant to intimidate her into silence or force Adrian to back down. It wasn't going to work. The door burst open. Adrian strode in, mud-splattered and furious, followed by a woman Elara didn't recognize, middle-aged, severe, carrying herself with the kind of authority that made even Pemberton straighten. What is the meaning of this? The woman's voice could have cut glass. You're questioning a witness without legal representation present? Pemberton blinked. This is a preliminary investigation, not a formal... She's been detained against her will and subjected to hostile interrogation by the very man she's accused of wronging. That's a clear violation of procedure. The woman set a leather case on the table with a thud. I'm Beatrice Hartwell, solicitor. Miss Vance is now under my representation. This interview is over. Now, wait unless you'd like me to file complaints about your conduct with the Lord Chancellor's office? Hartwell's eyebrow arched. I'm sure he'd be fascinated to learn how county magistrates handle cases involving their personal associates. Pemberton's face went from red to white. You were overstepping your authority. Miss Vance is free to go. Now. Castor stood slowly. The charges still stand. Let them. Hartwell gathered Elara's arm, already steering her toward the door. We'll see you in court, where you'll be required to actually prove your accusations instead of hiding behind procedural intimidation. They swept out of the room, Adrian falling into step beside them. Elara's legs felt like water. How did you... Mrs. Hartwell is the best solicitor in 3 counties, Adrian said quietly. She's represented half the estates in Yorkshire, and she owes my family a favor. Hartwell snorted, I owe your mother a favor. You, boy, I'm helping because I despise bullies. She gave Elara a sharp look. Are you all right? I think so. Good. Because we have work to do. Castor's going to push this to trial. He has to. Backing down now would be admitting guilt. She steered them toward a waiting carriage. Adrian's, Elara realized. We need to build an ironclad defense and go on the offensive. I want every piece of evidence you've collected, every witness you can produce, every record that supports your case. I have it all, Elara said, at Blackridge. Then that's where we're going. They climbed into the carriage. As it pulled away from the magistrate's office, Elara caught a glimpse of Castor watching from a window, face dark with rage. This wasn't over. It was barely beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare started, she wasn't alone. Adrian sat across from her, jaw tight, hands clenched. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you better. You got me out. I let you be taken in the first place. You didn't let anything happen. I chose to go. You shouldn't have had to make that choice. Hartwell glanced between them, expression unreadable. Are you two always this dramatic? Despite everything, Elara almost laughed. Adrian's mouth twitched. Usually worse. Wonderful. Well, save the melodrama for later. Right now we need strategy. Hartwell pulled out papers. Castor's approach will be to destroy Miss Vance's credibility, paint her as a manipulative opportunist, make the jury believe she fabricated everything for personal gain. They won't believe that, Adrian said. They will if we don't give them a better story. Hartwell looked at Elara. What's your background? Family? Education? Elara's throat tightened. My father was a clerk. Minor gentry. Barely. He died when I was 17, leaving debts. I had some education, tutors when we could afford them. The Dowager Duchess knew my mother distantly. She took me in out of charity. So you're educated but powerless. An outsider with no social standing who managed to gain access to one of the county's most powerful estates. Hartwell nodded. Castor's going to use that against you. The ambitious servant seducing the naive young duke. That's not, Adrian started. It doesn't matter if it's true. It's believable. And in cases like this, belief is everything. Hartwell tapped her papers. We need to flip the narrative. You're not an opportunist. You're a competent professional who discovered evidence of systematic theft and brought it to the appropriate authority. The Duke investigated independently and confirmed your findings. But they'll say, let them say it. We'll have documentation proving every step was proper, every record verified by multiple sources, every conclusion supported by objective evidence. Hartwell's eyes sharpened. The question is whether you can handle a courtroom, because Castor's solicitors will tear into you. They'll question your character, your motives, your relationship with the Duke. Can you withstand that? Elara thought of the interrogation she'd just endured, the contempt in Castor's eyes, the casual cruelty of men who believed someone like her didn't deserve dignity or justice. Yes, she said, I can. Hartwell smiled, a fierce, approving expression. Good. Then we fight. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Hartwell set up operations in Blackridge's library, transforming it into a war room. Documents covered every surface. Witness lists grew longer each day. Adrian brought in accountants, land surveyors, legal experts, anyone who could support their case. The tenants rallied too. Thomas Greer organized families who'd been affected by the land seizures, people willing to testify despite the risks. Their stories were heartbreaking and damning. Homes lost, livelihoods destroyed, all while the men responsible grew richer. But Castor wasn't idle either. Word spread through the county like poison. The Duke of Blackridge had lost his mind, bewitched by a scheming woman with no breeding and fewer morals. Society matrons whispered about it over tea. Business associates quietly distanced themselves. Even families who'd known the Thornfells for generations began severing ties. Adrian took it like hammer blows, each one leaving him more isolated, more alone. Elara found him one night in the study, staring at a letter. What is it? He handed it to her wordlessly. It was from his uncle, his father's younger brother, the only family Adrian had left. A formal, cold message expressing profound disappointment in Adrian's choices and requesting he no longer use the family name in any official capacity. Disowned, in all but legal terms. Elara set the letter down carefully. I'm sorry. Don't be. He's right. Adrian's voice was hollow. I've destroyed everything my family built. You've exposed corruption. I've become a cautionary tale. The Duke who threw away power and position for, what, a principle? Justice for people who'll never be able to repay me? He laughed bitterly. My father would call me a fool. Then your father was wrong, was he? Adrian looked at her with exhausted, haunted eyes. I'm about to stand trial in front of the entire county. I've lost my engagement, my allies, my family's support. And for what? So tenant farmers can have slightly fairer rents? So you can be dragged through court and called a whore by men who've never done an honest day's work in their lives? Elara flinched at the word. Adrian saw it and his face crumpled. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I'm so tired, Elara. I'm tired of fighting and losing. Tired of watching you suffer for my choices. She crossed to him, took his hands in hers. They were cold. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Regret what? All of it. The investigation, the confrontation, everything that came after. Adrian was silent for a long moment. No, he said finally. I hate the cost, but I don't regret doing the right thing. Then we keep going. Even if we lose. Especially if we lose. Elara squeezed his hands. Because at least we tried. At least we stood up and said this wasn't acceptable. That has to mean something. It means we're noble idiots. Better than being corrupt cowards. This time his smile was real, if brief. When did you become the optimistic one? When you started falling apart. She meant it as a joke, but it came out too honest. Adrian's expression shifted, his hands tightened on hers. Elara, don't. She knew where this was going, could see it in his eyes. Don't say something we can't take back. Why not? Because after the trial, after all this is over, win or lose, you're still the Duke of Blackridge, and I'm still me. Nothing changes that. Everything's already changed. Not that. She pulled away, creating distance before she did something stupid. We should get back to work. Hartwell wants to review witness testimony before... Adrian caught her wrist, gently, firmly. I don't care about the trial right now. You should... Elara. He pulled her back, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. If we lose, if Castor wins and I lose everything, I need you to know something. Adrian, don't. You were right. About all of it. The corruption, the theft, the need to act. You saw what I was too blind to see, and you stood beside me when anyone with sense would have run. His voice dropped to something raw. I don't know what happens after the trial. I don't know if we win or lose, but I know I'm a better man because you refused to let me look away. Alara's throat closed. That's not... I didn't do anything special. You made me care. About people I'd never met. About principles I'd ignored. About being worthy of the power I'd inherited. His hand came up to her face, thumb brushing her cheek. You made me want to be more than my title. Stop. The word came out broken. Please, stop. Why? Because if you keep talking like this, I'll... She couldn't finish. Couldn't admit what she'd been fighting for weeks. That she'd fallen for him somewhere between the ledgers and the confrontations and the quiet nights working side by side. That she'd stopped seeing the Duke and started seeing Adrian, flawed, stubborn, brave in ways that terrified her. You'll what? Elara looked up at him, saw the same desperate hope in his eyes that was threatening to tear her apart. I'll forget my place. Good. Adrian leaned closer, because I forgot mine weeks ago. The kiss, when it came, felt like inevitability and disaster wrapped together. His mouth was warm, careful, asking permission she gave without hesitation. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the world narrowed to just this, the two of them in a study that smelled like old books and smoke. Stealing a moment they had no right to claim. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality came crashing back. We can't do this, Elara whispered. I know. The trial, the investigation. If anyone finds out, I know. It'll destroy everything we've built. Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I know. Neither of them moved apart. Outside, rain began to fall. The estate settled into darkness. And in the study at Blackridge Hall, a duke and a clerk stood wrapped in each other's arms, holding on to something precious and impossible. The door slammed open. They jerked apart. Hartwell stood in the doorway, face grim, holding a document. We have a problem. Elara's heart, still racing, dropped into her stomach. What kind of problem? Castor just filed an additional motion. Hartwell's voice was tight. He's demanding a public assembly before the trial, full county attendance, a formal hearing where both sides present their cases before the gentry and tenant representatives. Adrian frowned. That's not standard procedure. No, but it's legal, and the magistrate approved it. Hartwell set the document on the desk. He's forcing this into the open, turning it into a spectacle. Why would he? Elara started. Because he thinks he'll win. Hartwell's eyes were hard. A public assembly means public opinion matters. And right now, public opinion among the people who count, the landowners, the gentry, the power brokers, is all on Castor's side. He's banking on them destroying you before this ever reaches a formal courtroom. Adrian's jaw set. Then we change public opinion. How? We have 3 days before the assembly. 3 days to convince the county's elite that one of their own is a criminal and that a young woman with no standing is telling the truth. Hartwell shook her head. I've won difficult cases before. But this? This might be impossible. Elara looked at the document. at the official seals, at the date that gave them 72 hours to prepare for the fight of their lives. "Then we'd better get started," she said. The rain fell harder outside. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and in Blackridge Hall, 3 people bent over a table covered in evidence, racing against time and power and the weight of a system designed to crush anyone who dared challenge it. The assembly would decide everything. And Elara knew, with bone-deep certainty, that whatever happened in 3 days would either vindicate them or destroy them completely. There was no middle ground anymore. The magistrate arrived at dawn with 2 constables and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Elara watched from the library window as Adrian met them in the courtyard, still wearing yesterday's shirt, hair uncombed, looking like a man who'd spent the entire night preparing for battle. Which he had. She tried to sleep. Failed. Spent the dark hours pacing her room, imagining chains, imagining a cell, imagining her name dragged through every drawing room in the county as proof that women like her, rootless, powerless, could never be trusted. Now, watching Adrian shake the magistrate's hand with cold formality, she felt her stomach twist. "Miss Vance?" She turned. Mrs. Hewitt stood in the doorway, face drawn. "His Grace wants you in the study. Now." The study felt smaller with 5 people crammed inside. Adrian stood behind his desk like it was a fortress wall. The magistrate, a thin, nervous man named Whitmore, sat across from him, papers spread between them. The 2 constables flanked the door, hands resting on their belts in a way that was probably meant to look casual but just looked threatening. Elara's throat went dry. "Miss Vance," Whitmore said without looking up, "Lord Castor has filed a formal complaint alleging you conspired with His Grace to fabricate evidence against him and other members of the gentry. He's demanding a full investigation into your conduct and your relationship with the Duke." The word relationship came out oily, insinuating. "That's a lie," Elara said flatly. "Is it?" Whitmore finally looked at her. "You have no family. No references prior to your employment here. You live in the Duke's household without a clear position. You've had unprecedented access to sensitive financial records. And now, conveniently, you've discovered evidence that destroys His Grace's political enemies while elevating your own status. My status hasn't... You're standing in a private meeting with a duke and a magistrate. I'd say your status has changed considerably." Adrian's voice cut through like a blade. "Miss Vance acted on my direct orders. She discovered discrepancies. I verified them. The evidence is sound." "According to you?" "According to documented fact. Facts can be manipulated." Whitmore leaned back. "Lord Castor suggests Miss Vance had motive, securing her position here through any means necessary, including influencing a young, inexperienced duke who's been isolated and grieving. I'm neither young nor inexperienced. You ended a strategic engagement on her word. I ended it because Castor is a thief. That's yet to be proven." Whitmore's gaze slid back to Elara. "Miss Vance, where were you employed before Blackridge?" "I wasn't employed. I was caring for my father." "And after he died?" "The Dowager Duchess offered me a position here." "Out of charity?" "Out of kindness." "How convenient." Whitmore made a note. "And your education? Where did you study?" "At home. My father was a tutor before he became ill." "A tutor?" The skepticism was thick enough to cut. "Can anyone verify that?" "He's dead." "How convenient," Whitmore said again. Elara's hands clenched. She saw what he was doing, dismantling her credibility piece by piece, turning every gap in her history into evidence of deception. "This is absurd," Adrian said, voice hard. "You're here to investigate a complaint, not prosecute a woman for having a difficult past. I'm here to determine if charges are warranted." Whitmore stood. "Miss Vance, you'll need to come with us for formal questioning." "No." Adrian stepped around the desk. "She's not going anywhere." "Your Grace, I understand your attachment, but obstruction of an investigation." "There is no investigation. There's a powerful man trying to destroy evidence of his crimes by attacking the person who found it." Adrian's eyes were ice. "And you're helping him." Whitmore's face reddened. "That's a serious accusation." "Is it? Tell me, magistrate, who appointed you to this position?" "The county board, of which Lord Castor is a senior member." Adrian smiled without humor. Strange coincidence. The room went very quiet. One of the constables shifted uncomfortably. Whitmore's jaw worked. I resent the implication. I'm sure you do. Just like I'm sure if I dig into your finances, I won't find any interesting connections to the families I'm investigating. Adrian leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my estate. You're going to tell Castor that if he wants to come after me, he can face me in open court with real evidence, not manufactured complaints designed to intimidate witnesses. And you're going to do it now, before I start asking uncomfortable questions about your own conduct. Whitmore stood frozen, calculation flickering across his face. Then he gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over. I'm counting on it. The magistrate and his constables left. The study door closed. Elara's legs gave out. She caught herself on the edge of a chair, breathing hard, adrenaline crashing through her system. That was reckless, she managed. That was necessary. Adrian crossed to the window, watching the magistrate's carriage disappear down the drive. He was going to arrest you, take you to some holding cell where Castor could control the narrative, make you disappear into the legal system until your name meant nothing. And now he's going to come back with more authority and less patience. Let him. By then, I'll have moved first. Elara looked up. What does that mean? Adrian turned from the window, and there was something in his expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not determination, something colder, strategic. It means I'm done playing defense. 3 days later, Adrian called another assembly. Not at Blackridge. At the county hall in the nearest market town, a public space, neutral ground, where anyone could attend and observe. Word spread fast. Too fast to be natural. Adrian must have sent riders to every tenant farm, every village, every corner of the county with a single message. The Duke of Blackridge requests your presence. Elara helped organize it from the shadows. She'd learned her lesson. Stay invisible, stay useful, don't give them another target. But she watched as the RSVPs flooded in. Tenant farmers, tradesmen, merchants, even a few minor gentry who'd been too afraid to attend the first assembly but were apparently willing to risk it now. They're curious, Adrian said, reviewing the list. They want to see if I'll actually do what I promised. And if you don't, then I've lost everything for nothing. The night before the assembly, Elara found him in the library surrounded by documents, maps, ledgers, the accumulated evidence of months of investigation. His jacket was draped over a chair, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair falling into his eyes as he made notes in margins. He looked exhausted and alive in a way she'd never seen him before. You should sleep, she said from the doorway. I'll sleep when this is over. Adrian, I know what I'm doing. Do you? She stepped into the room. Because this feels like you're about to burn down the entire county power structure and hope something better grows from the ashes. He looked up, mouth quirking. That's exactly what I'm doing. That's insane. Probably. He set down his pen. But what's the alternative? Let Castor win? Let him and his allies keep stealing from people who have nothing while hiding behind respectability and titles. You could compromise. Find middle ground. Salvage some of your relationships. I don't want to salvage them. His voice was quiet, but absolute. Every relationship I had in that world was built on silence, on looking away, on accepting that some people matter and some people don't. He stood, crossed to where she stood. I'm done accepting that. Elara's breath caught. He was close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the absolute conviction burning behind his exhaustion. What if you lose? She whispered. Then at least I'll lose standing up. Something in her chest cracked open. She'd spent years surviving by being small, by not making waves, by accepting that the world was unfair, and her job was just to navigate it without drowning. Watching Adrian choose to fight anyway, knowing what it would cost him, it made her feel brave and terrified in equal measure. I'm coming tomorrow, she said. Elara, I'm coming. Not as your assistant, not hidden in the back. I'm sitting where everyone can see me. She lifted her chin. If they're going to use me against you, they should at least have to look me in the eye while they do it. Adrian stared at her. Then slowly he smiled. You're going to get hurt. I know. They're going to destroy your name. Let them try. He laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that transformed his entire face. When did you get so stubborn? I learned from an excellent teacher. The moment stretched between them, charged with all the things they weren't saying. Then Adrian reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a gentleness that made her heart stutter. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For making me believe I'm not alone in this. Elara's throat tightened. You're not. His hand lingered against her cheek for just a second longer than necessary. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat, returning to his papers. But his smile didn't fade, and neither did hers. What? The county hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing against the walls, more crowded in the doorway trying to hear. Elara had never seen anything like it. Tenant farmers in their rough work clothes standing shoulder to shoulder with merchants in their better coats. A few minor gentry scattered throughout, looking uncomfortable. And at the front, in a reserved section, Lord Castor and his allies, faces set, arms crossed, radiating barely controlled fury. Elara sat in the third row, visible, exposed, exactly where she'd promised to be. Adrian stood at the front near a long table covered in evidence. He looked different today. Not softer, he'd never be soft, but more present, like he'd finally stopped fighting himself and settled into who he was meant to be. The room quieted as he began. 3 months ago, I returned to Blackridge and discovered something I couldn't ignore. Families who'd farmed our land for generations, evicted, rents raised beyond what anyone could pay. Land transferred to holding companies with no oversight. His voice carried across the room. I thought it was isolated, criminal, but contained. He pulled out the first ledger. It wasn't. For the next hour, Adrian laid out everything, not just the thefts and fraudulent transfers, the entire system. How land had been quietly consolidated into fewer and fewer hands. How tenant protections had been eroded through legal loopholes and backroom deals. How families had been pushed into debt, then dispossessed, then erased from records as if they'd never existed. And he named names. Not just Castor, not just the obvious players. He traced connections through the entire county power structure, showing how magistrates looked away, how solicitors facilitated, how even clergy had been convinced to stay silent in exchange for donations and favors. The room listened in stunned silence. Then Adrian did something unexpected. He called witnesses. Thomas Greer was first. The old farmer stood, cap in weathered hands, and spoke plainly about what he'd seen. Families evicted in winter, children going hungry, good men losing everything while the people who'd taken it prospered. I thought we had no choice, Greer said. Thought that's just how the world worked. But his grace proved different. He proved someone in power could actually give a damn. Another witness, then another. Farmers, tradesmen, a blacksmith's widow who'd lost her home when her husband died, and the land agent decided she couldn't pay rent alone, despite years of payments proving otherwise. Their voices filled the hall, not angry, though they had every right to be, just honest. Witnesses to a system that had failed them, finally being heard. Castor stood abruptly. This is theater, manipulation. You're parading the poor to win sympathy. I'm giving them what you never did, Adrian interrupted. A voice. They don't understand the complexities of land management. They understand when they're being robbed. The room erupted in murmurs. Castor's face went red. You have no proof of wrongdoing, just ledgers that could have been altered, witnesses with grudges, and a vendetta against men who served your father faithfully. My father's legacy is not your shield, Adrian's voice cut through the noise. And I have more than ledgers. He pulled out a new document, heavy paper, official seals. 2 weeks ago, I petitioned the Crown for an independent audit of estate management practices across this county. I provided evidence of systematic corruption and requested intervention. He held up the paper. This is their response. The Crown is sending investigators. Within the month, every land transaction, every rent increase, every eviction will be reviewed by magistrates with no ties to this county. The room exploded. Castor went pale. You had no authority. I had every authority. I'm a duke. I have direct petition rights. Adrian's smile was sharp. You taught me that, actually. All those lessons about privilege and power. Turns out it works both ways. Elara watched as understanding rippled through the crowd. Adrian hadn't just challenged the system. He'd gone over its head entirely. This is outrageous, Castor sputtered. The cost, the disruption, the cost of letting you continue was higher. You've destroyed any chance of stability in this county. I've created a chance for justice. There's a difference. Lord Valen stood slowly. He was quieter than Castor, more controlled, but when he spoke, the room listened. Your Grace, even if we accept your accusations have merit, and I'm not conceding that, you've made enemies of every powerful family in this region. You've ended your engagement, isolated yourself politically, and turned your estate into a battleground. For what? A principle? An idea? His tone was almost pitying. You're going to lose everything. Adrian met his gaze steadily. I've already lost what mattered in your world. Title without honor, power without purpose. Respect bought with silence. He gestured to the packed hall. This is what I have now. People who know I'll fight for them. That's worth more than all your alliances combined. Noble sentiment. It won't keep your estate solvent when no one will do business with you. Then I'll find people who will. A voice from the back of the room. You've got us, Your Grace. Greer again, standing with a dozen other farmers. Another voice. We'll trade with Blackridge. A merchant. Then a blacksmith. Then more voices. People standing, declaring support in defiance of every social pressure telling them to stay quiet. Elara felt tears burn her eyes. This was what Adrian had gambled everything on, not the approval of powerful men, the trust of ordinary ones. And it was working. Castor saw it too, saw the room turning, his face twisted with something ugly, rage and fear and humiliation all at once. You're a fool, Thornfell, and when this falls apart, when your idealism crashes into reality, don't come begging for help. He gestured sharply to his allies. We're leaving. They swept out, a dozen men in expensive coats, trailing entitlement and bruised pride. The door slammed behind them. The hall stayed silent for 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping, slow at first. Then others joined. Then the entire room was on its feet, applause crashing like thunder. Adrian stood at the front, looking stunned, like he'd expected anything but this. Elara pushed through the crowd, reached him. He turned and saw her, and something in his expression just broke open, relief and exhaustion and triumph all at once. You did it, she said, voice barely audible over the noise. We did it. No, this was you. He shook his head, reached out and took her hand. Right there, in front of everyone, not caring who saw. Nothing I've done would have mattered without you. The crowd pressed around them, people wanting to shake Adrian's hand, to thank him, to touch the Duke who'd actually fought for them. But in that moment, Elara only saw him. The man who'd risked everything because it was right. Who'd chosen principle over power and somehow, impossibly, made it work. The aftermath was messier than anyone expected. The Crown's investigators arrived 2 weeks later. Efficient, thorough, ruthless in their examination of every record, every transaction, every whispered deal. They set up in the county hall and worked for 6 straight weeks, interviewing hundreds of people, cross-referencing decades of documents. Castor tried to flee to London, was stopped at the border with a warrant for fraud and conspiracy. Sir Redmond had a heart incident when investigators showed up at his estate, survived, but was confined to bed under doctor's orders. Lord Valen disappeared entirely. Rumor said he'd left for the continent. The rest of the gentry who'd been complicit scrambled to distance themselves, offering restitution, claiming ignorance, throwing each other to the wolves in hopes of saving themselves. It was brutal and necessary. Elara worked alongside the investigators, providing context, answering questions, walking them through the evidence she and Adrian had compiled. They treated her with respect, not as a suspect, but as a witness who'd helped uncover one of the largest land fraud cases the Crown had seen in decades. It felt surreal. Adrian was everywhere at once, meeting with investigators, coordinating with tenant representatives, working with solicitors to establish new protections. He barely slept, barely ate, just worked with the kind of single-minded focus that would have been terrifying if it wasn't so effective. One night, Elara found him collapsed in the library, asleep at his desk with his head pillowed on a stack of legal briefs. She draped a blanket over his shoulders and left him there. The next morning, he found her in the breakfast room and set a letter in front of her. She recognized the Crown seal. What is this? Open it. Her hands shook as she broke the seal and unfolded the paper. It was an official pardon, clearing her of any wrongdoing related to the investigation, signed by the regional magistrate and countersigned by the Crown's lead investigator. She stared at it, unable to breathe. "You're free," Adrian said quietly. "No charges, no investigation. Your name is clear." "I don't understand." "I made sure they understood what you risked to bring this forward, what you lost, what you stood to lose." His voice was rough. "You're not just a witness, Elara. You're the reason any of this happened. They needed to know that." Tears blurred her vision. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." She looked up at him, this man who'd turned his world upside down and somehow convinced the entire system to follow, and felt something shift in her chest. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't powerless, and she owed it all to a duke who'd been brave enough to see her. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian's hand covered hers on the table. "You don't owe me thanks. You owe me nothing." "Then what do I owe you?" He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Coffee. I've been awake for 36 hours, and I'm starting to see double." She laughed through tears. "I can manage that." They sat together in the morning light, drinking terrible coffee and talking about everything and nothing, and for the first time in months, the future felt like something they might actually survive. The final report came 3 months after the investigation began. Castor: guilty on 17 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Sentenced to 7 years. His estate seized to pay restitution to the families he'd stolen from. Sir Redmond: guilty on 12 counts. Died before sentencing. His family paid massive fines. Lord Valen: tried in absentia. Convicted. Wanted throughout the realm. A dozen other minor players faced fines, censure, loss of titles or positions. The system had eaten its own. And in the rubble, something new was building. Adrian implemented reforms across Blackridge. Tenant protections written into law. Fair rent schedules. Dispute resolution processes. Representatives elected from the tenant farms to advise on estate decisions. It was radical, unprecedented, and it worked. Other estates began quietly adopting similar measures, not out of altruism, out of pragmatism. The Crown's investigation had made it clear the old ways were over. Adapt or face scrutiny. Change was slow, painful, incomplete. But it was happening, and Elara was part of it. Adrian had offered her a formal position, estate administrator, not a servant, not a charity case, an actual role with authority and respect. She'd accepted. Now she sat in meetings with land agents and solicitors, reviewed contracts, helped draft new policies. Her voice mattered, her ideas shaped decisions. It felt impossible, and right. One evening, walking the estate grounds as autumn painted the moors gold and crimson, Adrian turned to her. "I need to tell you something." Her heart jumped. "What?" "I'm terrible at this, at knowing what to say, how to say it." He stopped walking, faced her fully. "But I need you to know, none of this would have happened without you. Not the investigation, not the reforms, not any of it. You made me believe I could be different, better." Elara's throat tightened. "Adrian, I'm not finished." He took her hands. "I know I have no right to ask. I know everything about our situation is complicated and political and probably inadvisable, but I don't care anymore. I don't want to be the kind of man who's too afraid to say what he feels." "What do you feel?" His eyes locked on hers. "That you're the bravest person I've ever met. That I trust you more than anyone in my life. That when I think about the future, you're in it. Not as my administrator, not as my assistant, as my partner, my equal. The person I want beside me when I'm making terrible decisions and good ones and everything in between." Her breath caught. "I'm not asking you to marry me," he continued quickly. "Not yet. We have too much work to do, and you deserve time to figure out what you want without pressure. But I'm asking," he swallowed, "can I court you? Properly, publicly, not hiding, not ashamed, just us?" Elara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You want to court the woman with no family, no title, no connections." "I want to court you, Elara. The woman who's too stubborn to back down and too brave to stay silent and too brilliant to waste." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "The woman who saved me." "I didn't save you. You saved yourself. We saved each other." And somehow, despite everything, despite the impossibility of it, the scandal it would cause, the whispers and judgment and complications, she knew he was right. Yes, she whispered. Adrian's face broke into a smile that could have lit the entire county. Yes? Yes, you can court me. Properly. Publicly. Scandalously. She laughed through tears. But I'm warning you, I'm going to be terrible at this. Good. I'd be disappointed if you weren't. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and held her like she was something precious he'd been afraid to break. And standing there on the moors as the sun set over Blackridge, Elara finally understood what it meant to belong, not to a place, to a person, to a purpose bigger than survival. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Winter came early that year. By November, snow covered the moors in a blanket so thick that roads became impassable for days at a time. The estate slowed, but didn't stop. Adrian had spent months preparing, stockpiling supplies, ensuring every tenant cottage had enough fuel and food, establishing emergency protocols that treated people's survival as more important than profit margins. It was a different kind of winter than Blackridge had ever known. Elara spent most of her days in the estate office, a room that used to belong to Grayson before he'd been quietly dismissed and replaced with a land agent who actually believed tenants deserved fair treatment. She reviewed budgets, approved repairs, coordinated with the tenant council Adrian had established. Real work. Work that mattered. But the nights were harder, because courting, it turned out, was complicated when you were trying to rebuild an entire social structure while half the county still thought you'd lost your mind. Adrian tried. He really did. He took her to the village market and walked beside her in full view of everyone. Invited her to dinner with visiting merchants who needed to see that Blackridge's administrator was someone to be taken seriously. Introduced her to the few gentry families who'd cautiously resumed contact as Miss Vance, whose insight has been invaluable. The reactions ranged from polite confusion to barely concealed horror. Lady Pemberton, a widow with more money than sense, had actually clutched her pearls and said, "How progressive of you, Your Grace." Adrian had smiled tightly. "I prefer to think of it as practical." Elara had excused herself before she said something that would make things worse. "They're never going to accept this," she told him one night in the library. Snow fell heavy outside the windows, muffling the world. They'll tolerate me in a professional capacity because you've made it clear they don't have a choice. But anything beyond that?" She shook her head. "I'm still just the woman with no family who lives in your house." Adrian looked up from the contract he'd been reviewing. "I don't care what they think." "You should. You need allies, Adrian. Real ones. Not just farmers and merchants who are grateful but have no political power. You need people in your own class who will stand with you when the next crisis comes. And you think courting someone they approve of would give me that? I think it would give you options." He set down his pen very carefully. "Is that what you want, for me to find someone more suitable?" "No." The word came out harder than she meant. "But I don't want to be the reason you stay isolated either." Adrian stood, crossed to where she sat by the fire. He crouched in front of her chair so they were eye level. "Elara, listen to me. I spent my entire life doing what was expected, staying silent when I should have spoken, accepting things I knew were wrong because that's what men like me did, and it made me miserable." His hands covered hers. "You don't make me miserable. You make me better, braver, more honest. If that costs me allies, fine. I'd rather be alone with you than surrounded by people who require me to be someone I'm not." Her throat tightened. "That's easy to say now. But years from now, when you're still fighting the same battles because no one with real power will work with you, then I'll keep fighting. With you. If you'll have me." She wanted to argue, wanted to make him see reason, but looking at his face, at the absolute certainty in his eyes, she knew he meant every word, and maybe that was enough. "You're impossible," she whispered. "I learned from the best." She kissed him then, soft and brief and full of everything she couldn't say out loud. When she pulled back, Adrian was smiling. "Was that a yes?" "That was a, you're still impossible, but I'm too tired to argue." "I'll take it." They sat together in the firelight, his head resting against her knee, her fingers in his hair, and the world outside didn't matter quite as much. The letter arrived in early December. Elara saw Adrian's face when he read it and knew immediately it was bad. "What is it?" He handed her the paper without a word. It was from the Crown's investigator, formal, clinical, informing the Duke of Blackridge that while the investigation had concluded successfully and reforms were being implemented across the county, there remained concerns about propriety regarding Adrian's household arrangements. Translation: someone had complained about Elara. "They're saying your position here is inappropriate," Adrian said flatly, "that it creates the appearance of impropriety and undermines the legitimacy of the reforms." Elara's hands clenched. "Who complained? Does it matter?" "Yes," Adrian sighed. "Probably someone from Castor's circle, a last attempt to discredit us before they're completely destroyed, or just someone who genuinely believes a woman in your position is scandalous." "What do they want?" "For you to leave. Or for me to marry you immediately to legitimize your presence. Or," his jaw tightened, "for me to distance myself publicly and keep you on staff in a purely professional capacity with proper chaperones and restrictions." Every option felt like a trap. "If I leave," Elara said slowly, "they win. They prove that women like me can't hold positions of real authority." "Yes." "If we marry now, it looks like we're scrambling to cover up impropriety." "Yes." "And if we do nothing, they'll use it to undermine everything we've built." Adrian's silence was answer enough. Elara stood, paced to the window. Snow fell in thick curtains, turning the estate into something from a winter tale, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. "I won't let them force you into a marriage you're not ready for," she said. "I'm ready." She turned. "Adrian, I am." He stood, crossed to her. "I've been ready for months. I was waiting because I thought you needed time, space to figure out what you wanted without pressure. But if you're worried I'm being forced into this, don't be. I want to marry you. I've wanted it since you walked into that stable with evidence that could have destroyed you and handed it to me anyway." Her heart hammered. "That's not a good reason to propose." "No, but loving you is. And I do. Love you." In case that wasn't clear, the words hung in the air between them. Elara had imagined this moment differently. Something romantic, private, not shadowed by political pressure and scandal. But nothing about their relationship had ever been conventional. Why should this be? "I love you too," she said quietly. "But I need you to understand what marrying me means. You'll never be fully accepted by your own class again. They'll always see me as the opportunist who trapped you. Every decision you make will be questioned, every reform scrutinized for evidence of my influence." "I know." "And you're still asking?" "I'm still asking." She searched his face for doubt, for hesitation, found nothing but absolute certainty. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Adrian's expression transformed, relief and joy and something fierce and bright all at once. He pulled her close, lifted her off her feet, spun her in a circle, like they were characters in some absurd romance novel instead of two people standing in a library planning to scandalize an entire county. When he set her down, he was laughing. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." "Good, because I already bought a ring." "You... what?" He pulled a small box from his desk drawer, opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a single emerald, not ostentatious, not trying to prove anything, just beautiful. "When did you—" "2 months ago." I was optimistic. She laughed through tears. "You're ridiculous. You love me anyway." "Unfortunately." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. And standing there in the library where so much of their story had unfolded, Elara felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty about the future, they had too many battles ahead for that, but certainty about this, about him, about choosing to fight together instead of surviving alone. "We should tell people," Adrian said, "before someone else does." "How do you want to announce it?" His smile turned wicked. "Loudly." The announcement appeared in the County Gazette 3 days later. Simple, direct, no apologies. The Duke of Blackridge is pleased to announce his engagement to Miss Elara Vance, a state administrator and trusted advisor. The wedding will take place in spring at Blackridge Hall. All are welcome. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the county sent congratulations that ranged from genuine warmth to thinly veiled shock. The other half sent nothing at all, a silence that spoke volumes. Lady Pemberton wrote a letter expressing her surprise and concern about such a hasty decision. Adrian sent back a note thanking her for her interest in his personal affairs and suggesting she redirect that energy toward her own estate, which was apparently in dire need of management reform. Elara would have paid money to see her face when she read it. But not everyone reacted badly. Thomas Greer came to the hall personally, cap in hand, face weathered and sincere. "Your Grace, Miss Vance, just wanted to say, we're all real happy for you." He nodded to Elara. "You've been good for this place, for him. Anyone with eyes can see that." "Thank you, Thomas," Elara managed, throat tight. After he left, she had to sit down. "I didn't expect that," she admitted. Adrian smiled. "I did. They know what you've done for them. The rest of the county can think whatever they want." But the rest of the county wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, a delegation arrived. 3 senior gentry families. Not Castor's circle, but old money, old names. The kind of people whose opinions shaped entire regions. Lord Ashford led them. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Adrian received them in the drawing room. Elara sat beside him. Not behind, not to the side. Beside. An equal. Ashford's gaze lingered on their seating arrangement, but he said nothing. "Your Grace, thank you for seeing us." "Lord Ashford, what brings you to Blackridge?" "Concern and curiosity." Ashford settled into a chair across from them. "Your engagement has caused quite a stir." "I'm aware." "The question on everyone's mind is why? Why this particular woman? Why now?" His tone wasn't hostile, just direct. "Forgive my bluntness, but Miss Vance's background is unclear. No family connections, no dowry, no political advantage. It's unusual, to say the least." "Is there a question in there?" Adrian's voice stayed level, but Elara felt the tension in his shoulders. "Simply this. What are you trying to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm marrying the woman I love." "Love?" Ashford said it like the word was foreign. "Your Grace, men in our position don't marry for love. We marry for alliance, for stability, for the future of our estates and families. Then perhaps men in our position have been doing it wrong." Ashford's eyebrow lifted. "An idealistic view, a practical one. My estate runs better now than it has in decades. Tenant satisfaction is higher, productivity is up. We're implementing reforms that other estates are already copying. All of that happened because I stopped treating this place like a political chess piece and started treating it like a community." Adrian's hand found Elara's. She made that possible. Her insight, her intelligence, her courage to challenge systems that weren't working. So yes, I'm marrying her, because she's the best decision I've ever made. The room went quiet. Ashford studied them both with an expression Elara couldn't read. "You realize," he said finally, "that if you go through with this, you'll be effectively renouncing your position in county society. No one will receive you. Your children, if you have them, will be tainted by the scandal. You'll be isolated for a generation at least." "I know." "And you're prepared for that?" "Lord Ashford, with respect, county society has spent decades protecting corruption and exploitation. If the price of integrity is isolation from people who value neither, I'll pay it gladly." Ashford's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You sound like your mother." Adrian went still. "You knew her? Before your father married her, yes. She was a merchant's daughter, smart as they come. Half the county was scandalized when he proposed." Ashford's gaze turned distant. "But your father didn't care. He loved her, and she made him better, kinder, more connected to the people he governed." He refocused on Adrian. "After she died, he changed, became harder, more willing to look away from things that would have horrified her. I always wondered if he regretted losing himself in the process of trying to fit her into our world instead of changing our world to fit her." Elara's breath caught. Adrian's hand tightened on hers. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. "Because history doesn't have to repeat itself." Ashford stood. "Your Grace, Miss Vance, I came here expecting to find a young man making a reckless mistake. Instead, I found something I haven't seen in this county in years. Courage. and hoped that things might actually change. He inclined his head. You have my support, for what it's worth. Adrian stood, clearly struggling for words. Lord Ashford, don't thank me yet. The others will take more convincing, but I'll do what I can. He smiled faintly. Your mother would be proud of you, both of you. After they left, Elara and Adrian sat in stunned silence. Did that just happen? Elara finally asked. I think so. He compared me to your mother. He did. I never even met her. You would have liked her. She didn't take anyone's nonsense either. Adrian pulled her close. And she would have loved you. Elara buried her face in his shoulder, overwhelmed by gratitude and grief for a woman she'd never know, but who'd apparently paved this impossible road years before either of them were ready to walk it. The wedding took place in late March, when the Moors were just beginning to wake from winter. They debated a small private ceremony, but Adrian insisted. If they were going to do this, they were doing it publicly. No hiding, no shame. A celebration that welcomed everyone who'd supported them and made it clear this wasn't a scandal. It was a choice. Blackridge Hall had never hosted an event like it. The chapel was too small, so they set up in the Great Hall with flowers brought from every tenant farm. Wildflowers and heather, simple and beautiful. Chairs arranged in rows. No assigned seating by rank or title. First come, first served. The tenant farmers came dressed in their best clothes. Merchants from town, tradespeople. The few gentry families brave enough to attend sat alongside people they'd never normally acknowledge. Lord Ashford was there, seated next to Thomas Greer, the two men chatting like old friends despite coming from completely different worlds. It was chaotic, imperfect, loud. It was perfect. Elara stood in the bride's chamber, staring at herself in the mirror. Her dress was simple, cream silk, elegant lines, nothing ostentatious. Mrs. Hewitt had helped with her hair, pinning it up with small white flowers. You look beautiful, miss, Mrs. Hewitt said, dabbing at her eyes. I look terrified. That too, the older woman smiled. But you'll do fine. His Grace loves you something fierce. Anyone with eyes can see it. A knock at the door. One of the maids poked her head in. Miss, they're ready. Elara's stomach dropped. Already? You could wait if you need more time. No, I'm ready. She turned from the mirror, took a breath. Let's go. The walk to the Great Hall felt both endless and too short. When the doors opened and she saw the packed room, hundreds of faces turning toward her, her courage almost failed. Then she saw Adrian, standing at the front in a dark coat that made him look every inch the Duke, but with an expression that was pure relief and joy and absolute certainty. She walked toward him and the world narrowed to just the two of them. When she reached his side, he took her hand and whispered, You came. Did you think I wouldn't? Part of me worried you'd come to your senses. Too late for that. He smiled. Good. The ceremony was short. No grand speeches, no political posturing, just vows. Simple, honest promises about partnership and trust, and choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. When the officiant pronounced them married, the room erupted in applause. Adrian kissed her thoroughly, in front of everyone, and Elara stopped caring about scandal entirely. The celebration afterward was unlike any wedding reception the county had seen. Long tables set up in the courtyard, food and drink flowing freely, music from a small band of local musicians. Dancing that mixed gentry and farmers and merchants in ways that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Elara danced with Adrian, with Thomas Greer, with Lord Ashford, who proved surprisingly light on his feet, with tenant wives who thanked her for everything she'd done, for giving them hope that their children might have better lives. At one point, she found herself standing at the edge of the courtyard, watching the celebration, trying to commit every detail to memory. Adrian appeared beside her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Hiding from your own wedding. Overwhelmed by my own wedding. He handed her a glass. Regrets? None. You? Only that I didn't do this months ago. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their guests dance and laugh, and treat each other like equals because for one night, at least, rank and status didn't matter as much as celebration. What happens now? Elara asked. Now we keep working, keep fighting, keep building something better. That's not very romantic. Neither are we. Adrian smiled. But we're honest and stubborn and willing to make mistakes and learn from them. That's better than romance. Is it? He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. Elara, I'm going to mess this up sometimes, say the wrong thing, make decisions you disagree with, be too proud or too stubborn or too focused on principle over pragmatism. I know. And you're going to drive me insane, challenge everything, refuse to let me take the easy path, push me to be better even when I don't want to be. Probably. Good. He kissed her forehead. That's what partnership looks like. Not perfect, just honest, equal, real. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. I can work with that, she whispered. You'd better. You're stuck with me now. Unfortunately. He laughed, and the sound was so full of joy that it made her chest ache. 5 years later, Blackridge looked different. The tenant cottages all had solid roofs and proper windows. The fields were productive, not from exploitation, but from fair practices that made farmers invested in success. The estate office was staffed by people who believed tenant rights mattered as much as profit margins, and Elara sat at the center of it. Not as the Duke's wife, though she was that too, but as Blackridge's estate administrator, a position she'd fought to keep even after marriage, arguing that her skills and knowledge were too valuable to waste on social calls and embroidery. Adrian had agreed immediately. Half the county had been scandalized. Again. They'd stopped caring what the county thought. The reforms they'd pioneered had spread. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Other estates adopted tenant councils, fair rent practices, dispute resolution systems. Not because they were altruistic, but because the Crown's investigation had made it clear the old ways were done. It wasn't revolution, it was evolution, messy and incomplete and requiring constant vigilance. But it was change. Elara stood in the estate office, reviewing proposals for a new school, funded jointly by the estate and tenant contributions, governed by a board that included both gentry and farmers. The kind of project that would have been impossible 5 years ago. Mama! She turned. A small figure barreled into the room, dark hair, bright eyes, her father's stubborn chin and her mother's defiant spirit. 4 years old and already convinced she could do anything. Catherine, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be with your tutor. I finished my lessons. Father said I could find you. Did he now? Adrian appeared in the doorway, looking amused. She wore down the tutor in record time. I'm impressed. Catherine beamed. Elara shook her head, fighting a smile. You're supposed to be teaching her patience. She gets that from you. I'm extremely patient. You reorganized the entire filing system last week because it was inefficient. That's different. Adrian crossed to her, dropped a kiss on her temple. How's the school proposal? Solid. We'll need to present it to the council next week, but I think we have the votes. And the budget? Tight, but manageable if we redirect funds from... She caught Catherine's bored expression. Sorry. Adult talk. It's okay, Mama. I like when you talk about numbers. It sounds important. Elara's heart squeezed. She crouched to Catherine's level. It is important. Running an estate means making sure everyone has what they need. Food, shelter, education. It's not glamorous, but it matters. Like what you and Father do. Exactly. Catherine considered this seriously. When I grow up, can I do that too? Adrian and Elara exchanged glances. Yes, Elara said firmly. You can do anything you want, as long as you work hard and treat people fairly, even if other people say I can't because I'm a girl. Especially then. Catherine nodded, satisfied, then darted off to explore the office. Adrian pulled Elara close. You realize we're raising a terror. She's spirited. She's you in miniature. I was never that bold as a child. You were probably worse. You just hid it better. Elara laughed, leaning into him. Through the window, she could see the estate, fields greening with spring crops, cottages neat and cared for, people moving with purpose instead of desperation. It wasn't perfect. There were still families struggling, still repairs needed, still endless work ahead. But it was theirs, built on principle instead of exploitation, on partnership instead of hierarchy. Do you ever miss it? Adrian asked quietly. The life you could have had if you'd stayed invisible? Easier, safer. Not for a second. Not even when Catherine asks difficult questions about why some people think women can't run estates? Especially not then, Because she's growing up in a world where she can see it's possible, where she has a mother who's proof that the rules can change. Elara turned in his arms. That's worth every scandal, every battle, every moment of doubt. Adrian's expression softened. I love you. I know. Still not romantic. Still honest. He kissed her, slow and deep and full of 5 years of partnership, struggle, triumph, and stubborn refusal to accept that love and power couldn't coexist. When they pulled apart, Catherine was watching with exaggerated disgust. Gross. Wait until you're older, Adrian said. You'll understand. Never. We'll see. That evening, after Catherine was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Elara found Adrian in the library, their library, where so much of their story had unfolded. He was reading through tomorrow's agenda, making notes in the margins. She sat beside him, tucking her feet under her, and picked up her own stack of correspondence. They worked in comfortable silence, the way they had hundreds of times before. Two people building something together. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but honestly. Elara? She looked up. Thank you. For what? For being brave enough to stay, when leaving would have been easier. Her throat tightened. Thank you for being brave enough to fight, when silence would have been safer. He set down his papers, pulled her close, and sitting there in the firelight, surrounded by ledgers and contracts and evidence of all the work still ahead, Elara felt something she'd never expected to feel. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd found someone who believed broken systems could be fixed, that power could be wielded with integrity, and that a woman with nothing could become a woman who changed everything. She'd spent her life being invisible. Now she was undeniable. And that made all the difference. Outside, snow began to fall again, the last snow of winter giving way to spring. A season of endings and beginnings, of old orders breaking and new ones taking root. Blackridge Hall stood solid against the storm. And inside, two people who'd risked everything to choose each other planned tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days beyond, together, equal, unafraid. The invisible woman had found her voice. The isolated Duke had found his purpose. And in a harsh world that demanded conformity, they'd built something radical, a partnership, a life, a legacy. Not perfect, but theirs. And that was more than enough.